Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another episode of the Doctor's Lab with my esteemed brother and co-host, Dr. Khalid, and myself, Dr. Abdul Haqq. Dr. Khalid, brother Khalid, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Glad to be back as usual and to unpackage Hijra.
Alhamdulillah, Jazakallah khair. Yeah,
Inshallah ta'ala.
Alhamdulillah, being back and looking at this very important topic. Now, we spoke a few weeks ago about Hijra in the 21st century, and I think that's a very engaging subject. And I think reverse Hijra, I don't think there's such a thing, but we put that title there just to discuss that aspect of those who have returned home. And now not everyone who returns home has gone out on Hijra. And I say that thinking of myself in that instance, as I've mentioned previously, because some of the shuyukh were saying to me when I went to Saudi Arabia and I'd gone to work, that reality of being on a visa, that reality of not really being able to embed yourself with regards to how you could as a citizen was what made me never make that intention there for a Hijra in the sense of the Shari sense of the word, if I may say so. But those who have done Hijra and ended up having to come home for whatever circumstances, those who haven't done Hijra but lived abroad and intended to live abroad for as long as possible, having to come home, we're going to look at those aspects today and some of the challenges and share some of our personal experiences, Brother Khalid. I know that you returned as well from abroad, whether it be the Middle East, whether it be another land that we went to work or live, inshallah. But before launching into that, Khalid, as I said before the show, I was reading around the tafsir and some of the reasons for the revelation of Surah Maryam, the 19th Surah. I'd like to share something here because I know that in this narration we see that Ja'far, one of the Sahaba, when going on the Hijra, the first Hijra to Abyssinia, he read certain ayats 1 to 40 of Surah Maryam to the Najashi, to the Negus. And I want to just capture that because there's a particular angle I want to come from. So, for example, reading from the book here, it was this Surah Maryam was revealed before the first migration to Abyssinia. We learn from an authentic hadith that Ja'far, radiallahu an, recited verses 1 to 40 of this surah in the court of the Negus when the Muslims had been summoned. And I'll read an abridged version of this from Musnad of Imam Ahmed bin Hanbal, where the Negus said to Ja'far, "Do you have with you anything from your messenger brought from Allah to read to me?" Ja'far said yes and recited Surah Maryam from memory. King Negus listened to the recitation of the Quran and cried so much that his beard was wet. Negus said, "Of a truth, this and what Isa brought come from the same niche. You two may go, for by Allah, I will never give them up and they shall not be betrayed." And he made that statement when as you know, the Quraysh came. Amr bin al-As came and was very eloquent in the speech and tried to even give insinuations that in their book, in their message, they speak against Isa alayhi salam. Hence, the Sahaba being summoned, those who were there in Abyssinia at the time. And the reason why I wanted to bring this, there's a really long narration here from one of the Sahabiyat, and I'm not going to go through this, but the narration is so powerful in the sense that the first migration was to the land of the non-Muslims, okay, Abyssinia. And I'm not justifying it, I'm not inferring for one moment that we use this as a precedent to say we can do Hijra to the land of the non-Muslims. You'd need religious edicts, you'd need scholarly direction in that regard. There are enough Muslim lands that are out there at the moment to do Hijra to in the first instance. But why I'm bringing this is that when we reflect on the places we are coming home to, as we mentioned in the previous session, if we are here, we have to be doing something with regards to our deen and promoting our deen, whether it's silently, but through our actions, through our business, through what we do, how we conduct ourselves. If it's vocally, that second level, if we can't do it, change or enjoy the good with our hands, then to do it with our tongue. this is I think, a very good example to show, one, how the Sahaba were when they went and did this hijrah. Two, that this was an understanding leader, ruler, recognizing the message of Islam in the reference to Isa alayhi salam and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Tawheed at the particular time. I want to come from another perspective, that this was the first place eventually that we saw before Medina that became Muslim as a result of the Negus taking his Shahada. So I think it's a very powerful story and narrative. So many lessons to learn from that, because individuals sometimes will come back from living abroad and say, okay, I'm just going to put my head down. I've had my bit. I'm not doing anything. I just want to work. They see it as a sort of failure, that we're back in the land of origin, where we come from, the land of the Muslims. They see it as a type of failure. But conversely, if you remember last week, Khalid, before I hand over to you, not last week, when we had the last session, we spoke about that lackadaisical approach some of us adopted when we arrived in the land of the Muslims, wherever it may be, but particularly the Gulf countries, because of the affluence that were there, that we've made it. And that lulls many into a false sense of security because of the improved lifestyles, the increased packages, the ease that was there, hearing the adhan, being amongst the Muslims, as though we've made it. As you know, Khalid, we've never made it until we achieve Jannah, inshallah. So to then come back to the UK, some feel, okay, this is a step backwards. In actuality, no, it doesn't have to be looked at in that regard. Khalid, when you were in the land of the Muslims and you've come back with more knowledge. You've come back with more actualization of how to practice Islam individually and how to conduct yourself as a Muslim within the society that you're now living in. I know certainly that's the case with me. I went abroad, 12 years a Muslim, 20 years lived my life. I spent most of my religious life now in the land of the Muslims, and it's enabled me to move from the original abstract understanding that I speak about in my studies to an actualized understanding. So when I come back, I know how to contextualize my way of life as a Muslim in that regard. Now I'll hand over to you. That's why that narration regarding Ja'far and reading the first 40 ayat of Surah Maryam, which speaks about Isa alayhi salam and the Tawheed and this, and giving dawah at the very highest level, but in a land of non-Muslims, is so important to the context of what we're discussing today, inshallah.
Inshallah ta'ala. Naam. Yeah, as you mentioned, there's so many benefits, immense benefits, if we study the hijrah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the first hijrah, as you mentioned. And I think for a lot of people who traveled abroad, and those specifically who had the intention to make hijrah, that they wanted to immigrate and not return, that a lot of times the fact that they returned and their feeling in returning, I would imagine that is negative for some people, is because of the fact that they may not have achieved what they set out to attain. So if they set out and they said, hey, I'm leaving, I'm going to live in Saudi Arabia, I'm going to live in Egypt, Mauritania, whatever. And then for whatever reason, they're forced to come back to their country, they feel maybe a sense of defeat, and there is that cultural adjustment. There is that culture shock and how things have changed, and we grow as Muslims in our deen in general. As you mentioned, the stages that you mentioned and you detailed in your PhD, that we as individuals, I still find myself, you could say, kind of maturing in the deen in certain aspects, and you're hopefully still learning or still have a thirst for learning. So I think for some of the people, if their goal was to just reside in a non-Muslim land, and then they were forced after 10 years, 15 years, and they met other obstacles and they found it wasn't necessarily a reality for them to stay in that land. Like I met many people from the UK, especially, who one of the reasons they went back, they were getting ready to pack their bags, is because their children were older and they're saying, well, they can't get education. They're not learning anything in school, blah, 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 blah. And there's no future, and maybe they had that intention to make hijrah, or they had the intention just to work. Then there's another group of people who maybe their hijrah and their ties was associated a lot with knowledge. That for them, a big part of their hijra and a big part of their existence is seeking Islamic knowledge. So for them, maybe they, excuse me, maybe they achieved and accomplished something, but and the goals, the ultimate goals weren't obtained, and they find themselves, as you said, forced to come back to the West. But at least if they have the tools and they're acting upon it and they're giving dawah, like I know a lot of big du'at, I know brothers who lived in Damaj for like probably at least 15 years, 15, 20 years. So not just in Yemen, but they lived in Damaj alone, just seeking knowledge in a very restricted, contained environment and a whole different reality. And then now they're back in America and Canada and doing dawah and stuff like this. So at least they are still on their journey. So there may be less of that sense of failure and so forth. But if you didn't achieve something, not the deen nor the dunya, then that can be even more more frustrating. You know, that can be a challenge. Yeah.
I agree with you on that. And I think that looking at some of our own experiences, I've returned after 20 years being abroad, mashallah.
SubhanAllah, mashallah,
18 in Saudi Arabia and in UAE, Jeddah and Dubai, respectively. And I think that you have in your mind that you're going to be back one day, but it never is quite the timing that you envisage. It's always before you envisage that you'll return. So
yes,
return is quite a rude awakening, even if you've prepared for it.
You're right.
If you haven't prepared for it, it's even harder. It's a cycle. First and foremost, it's not just the physical return home. It's the psychological challenge you have to face, as you've just mentioned, the changes to society. Now, you may have been visiting or revisiting back home, as it were, ever so often, periodically. But that's not the same as returning and knowing that I have to set up roots and foundations here again. And that's especially true, Khalid, I would say, speaking to those of us who are converts. When I compare with some of my colleagues who are culturally, traditionally Muslims, the whole history there is Islam, they have family ties and connections, often they do, that they can come back to, even if it's to put a shelter over their heads, even if it's to get investment to purchase or rent accommodation for them. Whereas us as converts, it's very rare that we can go back to, if they're still there, that is, family members, non-Muslims, and say, right, we're bringing our family, we left with 2 children, now we've got 6, we've got 8, we've got, that's not, often they will say, well, you made that decision, and you made your bed, you have to lie in it. So that psychological readjustment does take some time. When you're coming back and you may have sold any property that you owned, and so you're coming back to zero. You can't go, if you want to go, some might say, but in your society, the Western societies, you can get benefits and allowances and everything. No, it doesn't work like that. And those of us who went to live abroad weren't on those benefits. Many of us weren't on those benefits before, and we want to come on that or know how to come upon that simply by virtue of how we were living before we left the society and upon returning to society and society. And even if we wanted to lean into that, there are laws that say you have to be resident for 3 years, even when it comes to medical and things like that. And before, alhamdulillah, Musa's jumped in now, I'm just going to say wa alaikum salam to Sister Shireen and others who salamed us. But looking quickly at what Musa said, Assalamu alaikum, brother Musa, quite a strange phenomenon. The years spent in those Muslim countries shape you. But before you know it, you are forced to leave and return to a home which feels anything but homely. And Musa, as you were saying now, is absolutely right. Khalid, you know some of the American brothers who are our elders, okay, who lived abroad 30, 40 years. Then suddenly, because of the retirement age in the Gulf, for example, they cannot work any longer unless it's a private organization and they say, yes, we still want your skill sets, which they don't often do because the cost of keeping you is far more, if not double, than bringing a new body on board and building and training that individual up. And so the land from which they originate is now alien to them. You know American brothers, I know American brothers that's happened to. I also know of examples of those from the Indo-Pak subcontinent, for example. Some of the older, elderly Pakistani, Indian, they've been there working their backs off in menial jobs, 40, 50 years. And they are afraid to return back because they've got no family left there that they know. Okay, the lifestyle is going to be different, and they are genuinely afraid. They are wrought with and racked with worry because where they've called home, mentally, physically, spiritually, are now saying we don't need you. And this is quite a brutal reality when looking at the countries that many of us have gone to because they are Muslim societies. Whereas when you come to the West, and we're not going to touch upon the migrations at the moment because I think there's too much to unpack there. That would have to be a separate episode in itself. But we're saying when we're returning back to these particular societies, they're alien to us, but they are actually home, especially from a Western context. But these homes, you've got immigrants coming in and they can get nationality. Well, prior to Brexit, that was. I don't know what the situation is in America now, but prior to Brexit, you could be there be here in the UK for a number of years and get nationality as a result. But in the Gulf, it's very difficult. And some might say that's not true if you've got enough investment, or now the new golden visa that's there in UAE. It's not a reality that is one that you can say
for most of us.
Standardized. So coming back home, Khalid, looking at that, starting from zero, and you do literally start from zero, and then looking at your children. Some of our children who have long aspired to be back in the West because we're from the West and they can show that and play that up while they're in the Middle East or wherever it is in Mauritania with their friends. Oh, you're British. Oh, you're American. And they get a pride in that, seeing that the respect and the admiration that is afforded to them by those in the lands, the Muslim lands that they're in. But when they come back to here, to the societies, it's often an altogether different reality, and some struggle. Despite having been raised in the land of the Muslims and us as parents trying to embed deen in them, we come back and we realize that there's a problem here. The challenges facing them are eroding whatever deen we felt that we taught a number of them. And I don't know if you want to speak to that particular aspect.
Yeah, that's a very difficult challenge, because I think, the reality is there's a lot of youth, and it depends on their age and so forth when they left those Muslim lands, or what have you, a variety of different scenarios where they are craving to come back into an open society. They're waiting. So yeah, they're going to the madrasa and they're going to the schools and stuff like that while they're in Saudi Arabia or what have you. But as soon as they touch ground in the UK or America or Canada, they're running to embrace what they feel they missed. Right. So this is a serious. It's such a serious issue, and it's interesting because some of the things you touched on. I actually did a khutbah on Jumu'ah, and I was highlighting this, that hey, because I looked around the masjid, and like 95% were from people who had migrated there, whether they were from Afghanistan, Somalia, Ethiopia, what have you. And I said, there's only a few reverts of us, in this whole audience. And I said, so with that being the case, you can't just sit stagnant here. That we do have a duty as Muslims to represent Islam. And exactly as you said, exactly what we're on the same page. I said, if nothing else through your manners, if nothing else through, what have you on the job site and, whatever, that we, there are so many challenges. Another thing that you mentioned that I want to touch on is that the difficulty or that time doesn't wait for you. And this is something I always struggle with. Whatever plans you have, whatever goals you set, it's not waiting for you. Time is just going. It's going in one direction. Wow. And the next thing you know, it's gone. So, and you find that that's another thing in those societies. If you leave in the 90s, if you left in the 90s, the end of the 90s to go to the Muslim lands, and then now it's 2020, you're coming back. I mean, it's literally almost like it is a whole different reality, right. And I liken it to some of the inmates I used to work with. And some of those guys had been, in prison 16 years, 21 years, 22 years. And you know, some of them, they're very fearful. Some of them are young and they're in their 30s, but they're getting ready to go back after 16 years. He spent half his life almost in prison. So now he's going to go back, and they're scared. They're petrified. And they don't even know they don't even know anything about a cell phone. You know, they're still thinking the flip phone. They are, don't know how to check out things at what we have as Walmart. I don't know if you have Walmart in the UK, but we have Walmart anyway. And they don't know how to go to the self checkouts, you know. And even that for myself coming back, you know, I was a little intimidated with certain things like that. You know, there's still, and certain modes of transportation. So the technology, but the lifestyle and the reality is not the different. It's not the same. So, for example, the person who goes away for knowledge and then they want to come back and maybe benefit their community or what have you, the reality on the ground is so different. There may be no longer a need for you. You could say maybe the scene or what have you, maybe in your locality is saturated with du'at, saturated with things, or the people are just not interested, and there's less opportunity, or sectarianism. For example, where I'm literally at right now, as we're doing this broadcast, on this side of the water, you know, there's a lot of basically Indo-Pak community that tend to be Deobandi. They're Deobandi, Maturidi, and their Aqidah. So there is no opportunity. I know a lot of their mashayikh and their imams here were cordial. You know, I pray in their masjid. Hey, salam alaikum. So my brother, hey, how you got back? Okay, that's it. They would never allow me to read a hadith in their thing. So there's no means for dawah. Where my dawah is in a whole nother other cities, you know, where the communities are a whole different demographic and so forth, and Aqidah, of course, too. But the point being is things don't wait for you, those opportunities, and things change, and things change so rapidly that you may, I think for some of us, we find sometimes that maybe we feel like we have no place. You know, we have nowhere to fit in, you know, because it's a whole different reality than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, you know, and the people that were around, and the reality on the ground, and the development of the communities. So trying to find your place and maintain your deen is very, very, very important. And the last point I want to mention, this is also when I met, Abu Sajid in Philly. Those guys, you know, they all in the Muslim Family Center, the Imam Muslim Family Center, which Muhammad Munir and Tahir and those guys, they all work together. They collaborate from time to time and so forth. But anyhow, I met him in Mecca, probably my last Umrah that I made. And he came up to me. He said, "You're Khalid, right?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I don't know you, but his face looked familiar. Maybe I'd seen him a little bit on YouTube or something." So we started talking, and he'd already graduated from Qura in Mecca for a few years. And he was just saying how that when you go back, that if you're not active in kind of in dawah and stuff, the environment will eat you up. And I thought, yeah, absolutely. I see what you're saying, because, for example, my life, I don't think my life, you know, now as a Muslim, and my Islamic development and my growing in stages and so forth, I cannot really be without doing some sort of dawah. That's why the social media, the YouTube and so forth is so important to me. I mean, that's what I invested my life in. I literally invested how many years of my life going and studying. So if I'm not doing that, I really fear for my religion. That's what keeps me. That is who I am. I can't divorce that. I couldn't just go to be the regular guy who just prays in the masjid. It's not, I couldn't, it's not, you know, I don't know. So those challenges of finding a way that you fit in and you get back into these societies is a great, it's a great challenge. And we've seen many people who drowned, who didn't make it. And then you see, alhamdulillah, those who are successful, who inspire you, you know?
Right. And again, I think coming back to that narration of the first hijrah to Abyssinia, we saw that while the Sahaba were residing there, their visibility was known. and and that's why they were embraced and accepted by the ruler and by default by the people. So much so that we saw the Negus, Najashi, take Shahada. Okay, so much so that when he eventually passed away, the Prophet conducted janaza in absentia for him. So we have to look at these lessons from that perspective. Usually we look at it from a perspective, yeah, it was the first hijrah and there was that outward migration. But I want to pause and look at some of the lessons that how the Sahaba were in that non-Muslim environment, and how they were engaging at the very highest level, how they were engaging at the very substrata of society, engaging business and everything like that, and the examples that they led, so much so that the ruler became Muslim. And we saw other examples of that in some of the literature I've been reading recently, where the ruler would not be Muslim, but his advisors and his court would be Muslims. And he had masajid all over the place, and travelers witnessed this and wrote about it in their chronicles. So that coming home, we've got to look at this, that coming home, some come and think, right, I'll wait till I can get out again. I'll wait till I move to, so they're treading water. They're in limbo, and they're keeping their families in limbo. Now, depending on the ages of those families, if you're young and you've got that energy and you're, okay, that first opportunity didn't work and the family's with you, your wife is supportive and you can get back out and you're equipped. Remember what we said about doing the hijrah. You've got to be able to take something. You've got to have something to give, to contribute to that society, a skill, a qualification. So if you're younger, and you feel, yep, I've got the energy. If you're older and you've got the energy to say, right, I can do this, I want to do this, fine. No one is going to say, hold on a moment. But for those who come and don't have those opportunities opening up for them, there's got to be a psychological readjustment and a mental, spiritual readjustment that I'm here. I have to be doing something in my life for me and as well for my family. And then if I can do more for the immediate society or the community that I'm in, then we need to be doing that. It is a struggle, Khalid, as you know. Coming back, I've been back since, end of November last year. Let's call it beginning of December. We're in July now. 8 months. To readjust within 8 months after a 20-year absence is not enough time. There's still...
No, of course not.
Still going to be adjustments. Alhamdulillah, some of us are able to get jobs quite quickly and everything like that and adjust and everything like that. Others are not so quick to do that. Then you've got to look at your children and schooling and everything. But also, Khalid, another key thing you would have noticed, you and I have noticed, you've mentioned about the landscape changing. Before, we were able to speak more openly with our dawah as against the ills of society. About Tawheed. Tawheed we can still speak about. There's no factoring or closing down in that respect there. Talking about the Sunnah, talking about Islam, as we've always done. The Salafis have always done that, mashallah. I think more so now, alhamdulillah, we're seeing from the Dawah, from yourself, Sheikh Tahir and others, and over here in the UK as well, an implementation of that Tawheed. I think in the 90s, there was a lot of education about Tawheed, but there wasn't the actual implementation, except from a few of the du'at who were speaking, Sheikh Abu Osama and those who were around at the time, and communities like Brixton really trying to implement what Tawheed meant. I think there was an element of isolationism that took place, or not, I know I was the chair at the time, but we tried to start opening out, going back into the wider communities. But coming to the point that I want to speak to you on, we've seen postmodernism and a liberal fascism. I call it liberal extreme in my works, as you know, all those years ago when I did my PhD, that has become so pervasive that it's affecting every level of society. And this is a minority position that's been taken that is influencing or impacting adversely on everyone. Yeah. We are muted in speaking against this, because what it can cause, not only to us, our employment, our children, the environments, community we're in. And you know what I'm speaking to in that regard. I'm not shy to speak about that, but I'm saying coming home, the whole vocabulary or aspects of the vocabulary are totally different.
Everything. The onslaught of that ideology, it's powerful. I'm working now in a Muslim organization, and I notice all the emails, everyone says their name as a Muslima and her, she, and something, his, him. And you're like, you know, subhanAllah. So I didn't say that. I just said my name, my given name, and then I said Khalid Green in the parentheses. I don't know if anybody's going to say anything about it, but yeah, it's a whole different landscape, and it is an onslaught. And it is, you know, even during Jumu'ah, they had a petition. And so we all, you know, I encourage the people to sign on the petition. I guess if you're a citizen, that this petition for here in Washington State now, basically, if your young 5, 6, 7-year-old runs away, and the reason that they run away and they're found by the state, the reason that they ran away was because of transgenderism, or they feel that they were oppressed because of their sexuality. The state does not have to, if you call and say, my child is missing, they do not have to say, we have your child or we're helping your child. They can, your child is taken away from you. So the state can literally kidnap a child that nothing to do with maturity, nothing to do with anything of making their own decision, nothing to do with abuse, but yet they, this is how this agenda is threatening the society. It's threatening morality from its core. So these are those challenges. I mean, the things that have happened just in the past few years is like a comic book or a movie. You know, it's like watching one of those movies where, you know, Big Brother has just, you know, everything. It's like the Twilight Zone. Okay. For those who know about the Twilight Zone. And so that, you know, it is just so, you know, right is left and left is right. Up is down and down is up. And maruf is munkar and munkar is maruf. You know, the good is evil and evil is good. And you don't even have the option of being on the sideline. You know, it's in all the schools. It's everywhere. So these are severe, unfathomable challenges that we're facing, especially because I've only been back since right before the pandemic. I came back in 2019, December, the last month of that year, 2019, in December is when I came back. And it's still taking this long for me to really adjust. And I'm still not settled here. I've relocated back to the state I landed in initially. And, you know, and my home is actually in another state. And, you know, I'm still trying to get settled because it takes a certain amount of income. It takes, you know, it's just so many different challenges and realities that you have to face. And then there's that moral, that onslaught of immorality, you know, and the politics and stuff. And so now you, as a person coming back to your land, you are ghuraba, you're gharib, very strange in this land, and the things that you're having to deal with and you're faced with that you never could have imagined. We never could have imagined some of these things, you know, really.
No, absolutely. No, I think similar to you, I decided not to move back to my local neighborhood, if you like. Okay.
Yeah.
The ends, as we call it. I decided not to. I'm actually living, my wife and I and our children, some of our children with us, decided to live outside of London. I work in London, I commute to London, but I thought I can't get back into what was already the capital city, fast moving, the moral decay that was in society, which has accelerated from, it's like on steroids now, from being, and having to mentally adjust to say, okay, I'm now going to be dealing with individuals and not know, in front of me, they may appear a particular way, but I can't address them according to the way their appearance, because I just don't know what and where they are with regards to their persuasions and how they consider themselves or how they project themselves in that particular way. That's to do with people. I think with regards to the terrain, as it were now, coming back, first and foremost, before announcing that you're back, and which is something I haven't done, I'm sure you didn't do the same either, you have to deal with yourself and really put out a plan for what you want to be doing. But you also have to have a patience, because when coming home, you're grappling with things, And you're actually wondering, why has Allah brought me back here? Now, Allah is not to be questioned, but you're waiting, you're thinking, you're grappling with being back and wondering and having to be patient with what Allah has in store for us. Why am I back here? I knew I would be coming back. Some of us probably knew we were coming back, but not so soon, even though 20 years, 15 years is a long time. I wanted another 2 years. I wanted another 5 years. It's similar to what we know about the hadith of life. We have hopes for longer than our life actual life decree in that instance. So some of us like to stay out longer. But now that we're back, now that we're home, again, I'll come back to that point. We cannot tread water until we are onto the next journey abroad. That's not something as a Muslim that we should do. And I believe that we have examples from our Salaf, especially the Sahaba. So, for example, I remember reading a narration many years ago. I think it's concerning Ali radiallahu anhu, and they'd conquered the land. And he continued to do the traveler's prayer for more than 9 months, nearly a year. He always intended to return home. But they were not treading water. They were giving dawah. They were teaching. They were building. They were even expanding beyond the borders that they'd conquered in that particular instance. So they were not treading water. They were not just sitting there waiting to go back out again in those examples there. And we need to take lessons from that. I think it's really, really important to take lessons from that. When we go back to the Abyssinian example, those Sahaba did not move from Abyssinia until the Prophet ﷺ had established Medina and said it was safe for them to come. They did not move. They were not just sitting there, right, we're here now, let's do absolutely nothing until we hear what's happening. Some went back to Makkah on the first occasion because they were given that false rumor that it's safe to come back. And then when they were imprisoned by their own families when they went back, others stayed until it was time to make the second hijrah to Medina. So I think for us, Khalid, coming home, many of us who've come home, again, converts have a huge challenge because we are starting from scratch. But I want to speak about some of our brothers, heritage Muslims, because some of my closer friends and yours as well, close brothers, when listening to their discussions, they had a dilemma while they were living and securing the countries that they were in and the jobs that they were in. Some of my brothers especially in UAE, when we used to have our dinners and gatherings and study circles, there was always that discussion. My parents are getting old now. My parents are getting older. It's not enough. It doesn't suffice for them to keep coming out. Yes, we've got apartments for them. They come, they love seeing their grandchildren, everything like that. But they say to us, UK, America, that's our home now. Not even the countries of origin, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, wherever that may be, Egypt, whatever countries. The UK is home now. So the dilemma for such brothers and sisters is that the duty to the parents. Now, the parents are not always calling them home. Some do. I'd like you to be back home. And they immediately say, I have to obey my parents in this. They know the reward and the weight of blessings serving their parents. But the parents who don't say that, I see the conscience still being pricked of those brothers and sisters who are saying, I need to return home to be with my parents. It's a huge dilemma for them. So I want to acknowledge that for our heritage brothers and sisters, that them coming home when they don't need to, they haven't, no longer, the jobs are still there, the security is still there. Unlike those of us who, right, okay, the job situation, I've finished my last contract, it's time to move on, and it's better that I go home because I'm not seeing the circumstances as favorable as I would like them to be in the next job that's being offered or such like. Those who are saying my children have grown up and everything, those other brothers and sisters who don't have those circumstances, coming home just to serve their parents, there's a huge reward in that. And there's a dilemma because I've got my children in the land of the Muslims. I've raised them in the land of the Muslims. The security's there in the land of the Muslims. My parents won't come, but we know about the obedience to parents. We know about that serving and reverence that needs to be given to parents in that instance. So converts, reverts, and heritage Muslims all have this huge dilemma when returning home. When we look at non-Muslims, for example, who use the terminology expats, when they go out, many of them end up staying in places like UAE because they love the environment. It's very conducive for them as well. But many of them go out just to make money. And you would have met individuals out there, they take the housing, they don't spend a penny of the money that they're earning, because that's with a view to channeling it back to the countries of origin. And then when they've done their term, they go and buy a house, they go back to the country. They may even denigrate the lands they came from, ragheads and this, that, and whatever. But look at the money that I earned from that. That's, I think, declining somewhat, because a lot of dawah has been done to a lot of the non-Muslims who are going out into these lands. We're seeing what's happening with the Premier League footballers in the UK all being signed up in Saudi Arabia at the moment. So there's a more favourable impression of the non-Muslims going to these lands, but their paradigm is altogether different. Carl is saying, I want UK to be good for us to live. Yes, Carl, this is something that we all would like. We can practice our deen here, but there are some constraints as it relates to the ideological constrictions as we discuss some of the changes that have taken place in society since we've returned. So, Khalid, I jumped about a bit around that. I just wanted to acknowledge that it's not just peculiar to converts, reverts coming home. It's something that is relevant to all of us coming home. But again, I come back to that point. When we are coming home and starting again, the psychological readjustment, the spiritual readjustment cannot be one of just burying our heads in the sand and closing the doors and the curtains and saying, that's it, because I've had the best part of my life in a Muslim land. We've surely got to bring what we have learned and benefited from in those lands back home.
No, I definitely want to expound on that. In that we also as reverts have the very similar dilemma of wanting to, really, that was a big driving force for me in wanting to come back too, was for my elders. You know, my mother and my grandmother is still alive. That's kind of one of the reasons that I'm here now, back in my home state. And she's 96. And yeah, she's still hanging in there. And I got to get some of that history still while she's still here. And so we also are driven by that as well, even though they're our non-Muslim relatives. And the reward is equal as well, as far as, you know, the reward for taking care of your elders. Right. But one thing I want to highlight or emphasize or look at is the fact that, that is going to be based on a person's intention. Okay. And we're having husn al-dhan for people's intention. But what I've seen in my experience, equal to yours, is that I've seen a lot of people who that's kind of their excuse for coming back. You know, they were muhajir and they'll break it quickly. They'll say, yeah, well, I am going to, I'm going to, okay, I'm going to leave. I'm going to, go back to serve my parents. I'm going to go back to take care of my elders at the drop of a hat. And what I mean is, there are a lot of people I've seen, or, because there's a little dilemma with their children or something like this, then they're quick, because I think it's already in their heart that they want to go back. They're missing, and this is a reality, but all of that comes down to the intention, and that is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what's so relevant here in relation to this, literally, even in the narration itself, the hadith of Umar radiallahu ta'ala, in which he said, I heard the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying, verily, actions are tied to the intentions, and everyone shall get that for which he intended. Therefore, he who migrates for Allah and his messenger, he is migrated for Allah and his messenger. Mm-hmm. And he who migrates to take some worldly gain, or to take some woman in marriage, he will get that for which he intended. Right. So this hadith is so relevant because it's also talking about hijra, and that hijra is such an important Islamic duty and something in which there's immense reward. So that comes down then the issue of, okay, if someone is a muhajir and then they go back and they break their hijra to go back to take care of their parents, which one takes precedence, and or are they going back for a temporary thing? Because I think what I have seen and witnessed, and only Allah knows the people's intention for a lot of us, is that we were already kind of 1 foot out of the door, and this just kind of gave us a justification. Well, I need to go take care of my parents. I need to go do this. I need to go this. But, really, maybe they found career stagnancy there. They knew their iqama was coming up to an end. Their jobs were not, were being phased out, as we see especially in Saudi Arabia. Saudiization has taken a huge toll on a lot of the industry, especially for those of us who are in education and stuff. The landscape has changed so much in the past 10 years, like radically changed, and the salaries and all these things. So there's really a lot of times, I think there's a variety of reasons, and this is not to take away from those who are sincere, who actually leave and go to take care of their parents. And again, the Prophet ﷺ said, "In the ma'amal binniyat, verily actions are tied to the intention." So only Allah knows what their intention is and what our intention is. And I think the thing that I gained the most out of this whole discussion, as you said, is that for those who do come home, which is a lot of people, that you are actively practicing your deen when you come back. You're actively and hopefully actively, if you've acquired some knowledge, that hopefully you're doing something to share that knowledge, because you will find, otherwise you may find that the environment eats you up, because there's so much, it's a different reality. Once you become accustomed to a place where you don't see anything, for most of the time in my years in Saudi, I didn't see anything that was to be able to come back now and literally go to the grocery store, or you're at a picnic at work that you kind of have to be there or whatever. And there's bathing suits, one pieces and half pieces and no pieces, and everything is there. That is a major shock to compare to, the woman got on the bus and her ankle, her abaya went up and you saw a piece of her ankle. Astaghfirullah, that hit you for 3 days. Now it's a whole different reality. So the environment can really, one thing I would say about living in some of those Muslim lands, especially the places that we resided in and living in Yemen and Sardinia, especially, that because it's unlike many other places, where the hijab was emphasized and enforced up until more recently, perhaps, I don't know, but that, the fitna was so you could avoid it to where it's easily to make your guard down. Now, I find that environment made me hyper sensitive. You know what I mean? Because you're in a protected environment where, like, for example, I had a student. I lived in a place called KHAIR when I first went to Sardinia, and I had a student from Qasim. And I remember once it was outside of, we're at a cafe or something, and he said, "Wallah, Ustad Khalid, teacher Khalid." He said, KHAIR is so much fitna. And I said, "Fitna? What are you talking about?" He said, here the girls, they go around and their eyes, you can see their eyes with their niqab. And I was like, because he said in Qasim, they wear like this and you can't even see the eyes. So it was so much fitna for him. And that shows you how everything is relative, right? And how your heart, especially those of us expats, whereas before we may have been given dawah to women that were in a bathing suit and we could still sort of navigate that, it wasn't a big deal. It was just so accustomed. But once you get in a protected environment, I don't know if it lets your guard down. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but where you come out of that and then it's hypersensitive. It's like even the issue, let's be honest, akramakumullah, it's a different topic. But what I find is, because, for example, a lot of our students and stuff like that, like in Saudi Arabia and a lot of those Gulf countries, unfortunately, because some of them, because of the separation of sexes, which is mashru', but, how we practice it, all the details, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. But I find that there's also some of those guys, the homosexuality is also running rampant. Right. You may not see it, that's not our world, but I'll tell you one thing. This happened at my job in Jeddah. So we were there teaching, and that was a shock for me to even see someone like this. So one of the students, he obviously had a lot of wasta, he had a lot of connections. I don't know if his tribe, I don't know, he knew the big people, but he was a, he wasn't transgender, but he was a, not a lady boy, but he was something, you know, and he would like makeup and a real thin guy. And at that time, you know, that was still some years ago. That was like 2015 or something. And he walked by my classroom, the whole classroom of 20 something men, you know, or actually that happened in my classroom, but the classroom, another brother who was teaching, he said the whole class turned. And then one of the students said, "Teacher, he's beautiful." And this guy was, you know, so this, why I'm saying this is to say that sometimes the severity of those environments, and I don't know if it's other external stimulus, I don't know what all the factors are, being around men all your life and boys all your life and all that stuff. I don't know how the shaitan, you know, and then now the external thing, but you know, that was also an issue too. And it seemed like to me from my discussions with some of my students in those latter years in Sardia, that was becoming like almost, you know, where it was kind of like not a big deal that, oh yeah, we know so-and-so or so a bunch of guys, they'll come to the party and they are like that, you know?
No,
So it becomes, yeah, it's just, so this is it's a travesty, but I guess to say all this was to bring it back home is that sometimes you get, you know, in being in those bubbles. Now there's a, what do we say? Insulated, or we're in a insulated environment. What do we say?
Incubated.
Okay, incubated. I never heard that one, but it's sort of, I would say insulated. You know, I'm not talking about producing that behavior, but I'm just saying your environment is so restricted and you're living in a bubble. Okay. So if you, for example, living in Damaj to living in other parts of Yemen was a bubble. You know, that was a whole different reality. Okay, you don't see women at all. You are just seeing students of knowledge and the scholars, and you eat together, and it's like not like the rest of the society. You leave that, you come to America, any place in America, you know, it's like, you know, it's the environment is like on steroids. It's the stimulus, the difference in the cultural norms and everything, and the munkarat that you see as well, the sins. So, you know, when you're so insular, or you're so isolated and in a bubble, that sometimes when you go outside of that bubble, I mean, you're susceptible more to social ills and the distractions and the fitna. You know, I've lived in Saudi Arabia for many years of my life, so coming back, it's just kind of, wow, whoa, this is heavyweight stimulus. And then having, you know, most of my years in Saudi Arabia, I never worked with a woman. I didn't, you know, there was no ikhtilat until my last job, and they started changing it as policy. So there was like 3 women that were in the admin. So they would come around us and we'd have to work with them a little bit. And, you know, and then it was a strict rule. There better be any kind of harassment or the hammer's coming down. Like it was going to be a big deal. So they gave a big lecture and stuff like this. So this was the changing times. But to go from that, from so many years of my life, to come back, and now my boss is a woman. This one is a woman. They wear, and it's also a particular culture that they come from, and where the tightness of the pants and the tightness of the clothes and the dress, and, you know, you're in the mix, you know, it's been a very difficult adjustment, because that's the reality that we find. So that's a whole nother reality when you come out of an environment where there's no ikhtilat, to where the reality is for most of us, we end up having to have jobs where we're ikhtilat, where you will be, your boss is a woman, and you will have meetings with only your boss. You know, you will be alone, and these are reality. The head of the whole thing is a woman. Most of my administration, the job I just left, were women. They were all, you know, it was just like, and they were, you know, it was different. So anyhow, these are very different challenges that we face in making that adjustment. You know?
I think it's very important. You've raised some really important aspects there. I want to talk on that before we move forward.
Yeah.
Based on what you said, like, for example, I deliberately stayed in some of the more liberal cities because I didn't want there to be a culture shock to my family. So from London, we moved to Jeddah.
Yeah.
Was at the time the most liberal city, but there's Dean there, mashallah.
Yeah. Alhamdulillah. I benefited a lot in Jeddah. Yeah.
Right. So I ran schools, as you know. I ran institutions. So
Alhamdulillah.
there were female sections, male sections. Some of the international schools were classes weren't mixed. Alhamdulillah, I was able to keep that division and everything like that until, as you said, the rules started coming in. There need to be more women in. I had some Saudis who, mashallah, practicing Muslimah, made sure they had their own spaces and everything. Even one of my daughters came and worked there. So, but for me in that instance, Khalid, I'm going to come back to that point of abstract to actualize understanding, my PhD again, because when we came to the deen, and those of us from the West, we've always been in a mixed environment. We've always known comfortably as non-Muslims how to engage with the opposite sex, and it was normal to us. Then we became Muslims and we understood the context of mixing, free mixing, I think in an abstract manner, okay, a very abstract manner, to the point where sisters were leaving university, but we weren't. Some of us were. Some of us were leaving work. And there were hardly any circumstances or contexts where you could work in separated gender roles, okay, in the West. So we imposed some hardship upon us because of the abstract understanding or the not fully developed understanding of how to navigate that particular aspect. Now, I'm not advocating free mixing, and then we need to look at what that free mixing actually means, because no one would say that the men and women doing tawaf around the Kaaba are free mixing. We need to understand the context that are there. So what I'm alluding to here is, so moving to the Muslim lands now, working in the Muslim lands that were segregated to an extent, heavily segregated as you're describing, and working in that, and then coming back out from that after having some exposure to, as you said, working with some women, moving back into the context of society. So this complete cycle. Surely for us, and I want to hear your experience on that after I've moved to the next point. Surely for us, we are able to then bring to bear our experiences and contextualize how to navigate in the space since we've returned home, being amongst women, engaging and everything, because of what we've learned living abroad. Surely that experience abroad has helped us, because before we were abroad, we were in that environment as new Muslims or non-Muslims. So there needs to be a comprehension or comprehensive context of taking all of that in. But that doesn't diminish what you've said, that it heightens the fitna in the sense, because there's been that period of isolation. So I'm going to park that there for now for a question that I want you to ask you. Did it help in that sense? So look, in my Jahiliyyah, I was around women. Then I came to the deen. I had an abstract understanding, away from women. I lived in some Muslim societies, away from that mixing. Then gradually, slowly but surely, I started being exposed to that again. But my understanding and comprehension of the deen was such that I know how to engage, abstain, navigate this particular space now. So that's the context. The other thing I want to put to you, Khalid, as well, I want to ask this question, and hopefully we can explore that. When someone's circumstances change in the Muslim society, the job now is job finished, it's time to come home. Children have grown, no educational opportunities for them, it's time to come home. But there's a resistance against that while seeking to stay in that land or other Muslim lands. And in doing so, you start falling into debt. You start owing bills to your bank, to your landlord, to everyone. You start asking the local community or the expat community that you have there, the brothers and sisters, to help. And you keep doing that to the extent that you're falling heavily into debt. The work hasn't come. And now the upper hand is no longer better than the lower hand. You are the lower hand. In those circumstances, what is the position? Is there an obligation to return home because you are now in a situation that is untenable?
That's a good question. Excellent message. I'm glad you came up with that. You taken the whole, you navigated like a ship captain. You took it over there. We're going into a new ocean, but beautiful. Very important, Dr. Barakallah Fikum. So I guess I'll touch on that really quick so I don't forget that. That is a thing I have never, that's myself, wanted to be in a position like that. Now, no one wants to be in that position, but for me, that's always been important. There's different people and different ways of thinking and different ways of thing. I'm more of the tie your camel type, more so. I'm more on the cautious side. So I'm like, okay, I've got to have the job contract, and the contract needs to be this, and I need to have such and such salary. Da, 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 da. I've met brothers who lived in Medina who were not getting their paycheck. They had families, and they just loved to be in Medina so much that they, they had these horrible jobs. I don't think they had their degree or anything like this. And they were just, they hadn't been paid in a month or two, the landlord, just issues. But for them staying there now, and Allah knows best what their end result, were they able to make hijrah and were they able to stay, how long they were able to stay. But that was just not me. I didn't want to put myself nor my family in that situation, nor be in a situation where I'm having to ask. And a lot of people also with their families, the husband dies. How many brothers did we meet who passed on? And, and that's the reality. A lot of us don't have anything to leave our families anyway, but they passed on, and then their family is in Jeddah, their family's in Medina. And then there's a big fundraiser, and they're asking, it's on YouTube, it's on, internet and stuff like this. Now, there are legitimate scenarios like this where, and people have needed that help, and that's great. But when there's a man of working age and he has the ability to return, or that's just an option he's going to have to think about. Me, I would have preferred, and we ran into this scenario many times, many brothers I met that didn't have the degrees, and I never thought I was better than them, but I was always like, that's a ni'mah that Allah favored me to get educated and have these tools. That's how I came out, and that's how I wanted to roll. I did not want to be just hanging on by my chinny chin chin, having to take any job just to stay there where I'm miserable. I can't do talib al-ilm anyway because the job and it barely pays the rent, and I'm just living in Medina. That's beautiful. There's ajr, but that just wasn't me, and nor to put my family through that. No. So for me, being that lower hand as a working man and stuff like that, so it's not talking about those who lost their loved ones through death, and especially the one who earns, the provider, min fadlillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that, but those people, who are just trying to hang in there, it's like, to me, sort of beating the dead horse, and I had been in a situation like that one time in my after leaving Yemen and going to the UAE for the first time, and I was struggling. And then some people, they gave me some money, and they said, hey, you should go back to America. And I was like, okay, yeah. So I went back, cut it short, and alhamdulillah, they helped me. I got the ticket, and life was much different then. Anyway, after that, I never, ever wanted to be in a situation like that where I was dependent upon the people, and especially with regards to your family. And, I've known brothers who, because of their residency permit and some, because of certain Saudi laws and stuff, the brother went to prison for a while, man, right, over something we would think minor, wouldn't be an issue in the West, but he actually had to serve, related to debt, I think, and his landlord or something wanted him, and this is a good brother that I've known, is a good friend of mine, and this and that and the other, but he's, was just having a hard time, and he's still there. May Allah bless him and preserve him, but he stuck it out. But I'm not like, we're different. So everyone's different in that regard, but I don't want to be in a situation where I have to, in order to stay there, that I'm asking for people. No, if you're going to do that talib al-ilm journey, you need to find a little assistance. That's okay, one time or this and that and the other, but you can't expect everyone else is going to finance so you can do talib al-ilm and stay in the land of the Muslims, and they're going to take care of your family or something like this. No, I'm not with that at all, and I don't think that's necessarily going with the nusus, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, meaning the divine text. The second point, which was the first thing you mentioned, was about the knowledge and our experience coming full circle and coming back to, being to a mixed environment. Well, you see where the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to lower the gaze, okay? And to, he gives us these means of navigating in order to protect ourselves from fitna, you know, and to marry, like the Prophet ﷺ said, Ya ma'ashara shabab, man istata'a minkum al-ba'a falyatazawwaj. O youth, those who are amongst you who are able to marry, then they should marry, you know. And so many nusus about getting married. So lowering the gaze, marriage, different things to protect yourself, fasting, if you're unable to do so. So, but the reality is, even with all that knowledge, the fitra, and that's why we have those things in place,
Right.
is that even with all of that, no matter how much knowledge you have, once you begin to let your guard down a little bit. So if your boss is you know, that's your boss, and you have to be alone with her, and you're having meetings and Zooms with her, and this and that and the other, or other women. You know, it's just an office full of women. You're the only man. You know, it doesn't matter if you were in Saudi and Yemen and Kuwait, wherever. You know, you're still a man, and the shaitan is still present, right, especially when you're alone. And that is why those steps are in place. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا زِنَا. Don't even go near adultery. Why? Because those steps, it doesn't start, it's not ala tul. It's khutwa. It's steps. It's so slight, and everyone's different. Someone could be a person of strong faith and a strong deen, but it's those small steps, and then next thing you know, boom, it's a done deal. And it's that easy. I know people who've started with a good intention to go to, to get married online, to websites. They start out, hey, I'm going to a Muslim website, and I can't seem to get any action. Let me go to another one. Plus, everyone's covered. How am I supposed to know if I'm going to propose and this and that and the other? They go from there. Next thing you know, they are more or less a porn addict. And I know people who've had this scenario, who've had this situation. So my point is it's not mubashir. It's not quick, but that's the whole point. So yes, it gives you the tools to navigate, maybe, and that's going to depend upon the person, their tools, and how they navigate. But I still think the danger is always present. It's so, that's the fitra. That's our nature, So if a woman, you're a man, wow, you come into the office, you're normally on, you even have a book of sunnah in your hand, and then you're coming in, oh, good morning, and she's got a nice perfume on. Boom. Whoa. You may not say anything.
Or that book of sunnah might be
a
magnet. It might actually
that's what I'm saying. You're going to need it as a barrier or something. So that's how the first step, because it's the fitra, and it's going to be that. Oh, she's a little bit attractive. Wow, she looks nice today. Yeah, it's khutwa. So it's not going to start mubashir, but then when you, there's a work trip. You guys got to go, So what do? You quit. You do, these are real dilemmas and real difficulties and challenges. And so my point is that no matter that's why Allah gave us those means of dealing and those means of prevention, because even the best of us, it can happen to. That's why the scholars, it seems so strict when you read their fatwa and you hear what they have to say. Oh, why can't some music be halal? Why can't this? Why can't this? And they're just shutting the door and they're chopping it down because they're chopping the means, because they know, the sheikh is a sheikh. He can, what, you don't think he's a man? You don't think he's going to, no matter how beautiful his beard and how many times he gives explanation, Kitab al-Tawheed, he's a man. He still has that inclination. And they cut it at the thing, so they don't watch TV. They don't this and that, more than likely, this is what I expect from a lot of our scholars, and especially major scholars and stuff like this. But, they cut those doors because they cut sadadariya. They cut the means to those things, to the evil, even the small steps, because it doesn't happen mostly like this. It's not like, I'm working with my boss is a woman. All of a sudden we're having extramarital affair in the office the next day. No, but it's khutwa. It's step by step, a little thing. Oh, so what do you think about my perfume? Oh, that's right. You guys are Muslim. I forgot. Yeah, no shaking hands and stuff like this. Oh, so what do you think about my top today? And it has no shoulders and all this stuff. What do you think? This is real. So the reality is you can see the danger of those environments. And that even when you have those tools, it's still the reality. It's very difficult to navigate, and you're not guaranteed salama. And that's why many of those scenarios are haram from the asl. You know, they're haram, you know,
Right.
to be in that scenario because of that. Because what it leads to.
Very, very true. And I think, no, Jazakallah khair, Khalid. As we're drawing to a close, alhamdulillah, some of the comments that have been made there, between our brothers and sisters, and very valid comments. Sister Shamina, you're right, that hadith, that we are holding on to hot colds, and just in that hadith and what we're looking at, we have to realize that even coming home, but when we come home, we've got to ensure that lessons learned from living abroad are taken. And one of those lessons as well, Brother Khalid, I'll conclude on this because my group's coming in very well. It's in, I think.
Yeah. Dhuhr for us, yeah.
One of the things that we've got to look at, our sense of identity when it comes to the point of nationality becomes a lot more prominent when we're living abroad. And when we come home, that is often heightened. That's not such a bad thing. But I think also what needs to be heightened when we come back is an appreciation, not a deference, an appreciation that we are home. Because unlike in the lands that we were residing in, there are the benefits we've discussed. We don't need to reiterate those benefits. But when we're here, we are citizens of the lands that we're in, and there are certain rights or opportunities or allowances that we have access to that we don't have access to in the Muslim lands. Now, again, if there are those who are returning for the reasons that Khalid has said, which are, like you said, Khalid, their one foot is out already and they're just looking for the excuse to come back, and those benefits are sweetness for them to come back, then that's a problem that those individuals have to check themselves and ask, were their hearts really making hijrah? Not the physical hijrah, the hijrah to be in a more conducive Islamic environment. They have to question themselves in that instance.
But also the niyyah changes too, as we talk about those stages, you know, because we may start off, many of us, we started off with that mindset. And as you said, we go through the maturity stage, we go through the stages. So it switches, you know, you may struggle with that during that process, and you are in flux. We're always in flux with our iman and stuff like this.
Yes.
Sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
That's a good point. So when coming back, we mustn't be coming back from the perspective of the benefits that I can achieve from the state. Okay, I'm being very careful what I say here now. I'm coming back for, I can get all these benefits in the States and they didn't give them to me. In the country that I'm from, they give me all these benefits. I don't have to pay for my medical, whatever, especially in the case of the UK. And they didn't give me that there. And it puts some sort of disdain and some negativity and some dislike, even if it means my job has finished. And then we start having some disdain. And we've got to be careful that when we come home, we don't join that bandwagon of negativity towards those societies that we have benefited from more than we can ever imagine, religiously, spiritually, everything. And some of us end up doing that because we've had a bad experience, or we collect the bad experiences, which often do not outweigh the good experiences. And we're suddenly speaking with a tongue, the same as those who hold those lands to be backwards, enemies to the West. We've got to be very careful that we are not connecting our negative experiences with the propaganda and perspectives of the society that we call home. So we've got to be very careful of that, even though home may have some of those benefits that, as I said, free medical care and things like this. So in conclusion, again, I will repeat the point that I made earlier and from the outset. When coming home, it is a challenge. There are a lot of psychological challenges to overcome, as well as other, let's say, logistical ones. But when coming home, like when we went out to those societies, taking something to contribute to those societies, what are we bringing back now to contribute to the societies that are our home from a perspective of dawah, from a perspective of religiosity? Because we cannot just come back and sit, arms crossed, under our legs and just sitting there. We've got to come back better than we were. We've got to come back showing what living in a Muslim society has done for us. We have to come back showing what the deen, the religion, has done for us. Even if we've had trials and in those lands. We've got to come back better than we were, and sharing that what was good from those societies. Those would be my concluding words. No matter how we came back, no matter why we came back, it's really important that we come back and continue. Hear my words here, keyword, because when we left, we've come back and continue to be ambassadors for the deen. Khalid, I'll leave you to conclude, inshallah.
Jazakallah khairan. I don't really have anything to add to that. And Jazakallah khairan for an enlightening and a engaging discussion.
Well, yeah.
And it is an important topic, I think, for those, especially those who may be on the path to Hijra, have some insight into this journey, or it may be a part of their personal journey. So we hope that it was beneficial for the listeners, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the Almighty to accept our good and forgive our evil. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, until the next our next discussion, bi'idhnillah ta'ala.
Jazakallah khair, Khalid. Jazakallah khair to our brothers, sisters, and guests who are viewing. And we will see you, inshallah, with another topic in another 2 weeks, bi'idhnillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.